Okay, Jan, I think we've got everyone in the room.
Great, lovely. So welcome everybody. It's really great that you've been able to join us for this webinar focusing on our second course around safeguarding, this time implementing safeguarding in the international aid sector. But it's really good to see you. It's great if you've done MOOC1 and you're joining us again to continue on MOOC2, or if you're here just to find out. Yeah, but welcome, really great to see you all. So do you want to just move on to the next slide, Rachel? And just to say that over the next hour, we are going to just start off with Peter Taylor from FCDO, who's going to just talk a little bit about FCDO's commitment to safeguarding. I'm then going to just talk a little bit about the leadership courses that we're doing and the role of the OU in relation to working with FCDO and the platform that we're putting the course on. Anita will then talk about the overview of MOOC2. Hannah will then just talk a little bit about the platform we're using and registering for MOOC2, and then at the end there'll be time for questions and answers. So as I said, really great to see you. I should have said I'm Jan Webb. I'm the academic lead. I've picked up this work for MOOC2 onwards, and so it's great to be involved in this. But to get started, I'm going to hand over to Peter. Peter, are you there ready to sort of say some words before we move on to the rest of the agenda? That would be great. Thanks, Peter.
Great. Thanks very much, Jan. Great to be here. Thanks for the opportunity. As Jan said, I am head of the safeguarding unit in FCDO. I'm just going to talk a little bit about FCDO's overall commitment to and approach on safeguarding against sexual exploitation, abuse and sexual harassment in the aid sector. Next slide, please. So what do we mean by safeguarding? So look, I think all of you will be familiar with this. So we're talking about avoiding harm to people or the environment in general terms. But the safeguarding units that I've headed up for 3.5 years now in FCDO focuses on sexual exploitation, abuse and sexual harassment in the aid sector. That means within FCDO, through the partners we fund and in the sector as a whole. I probably don't need to spell it out about why it matters, the harm it causes. It undermines the integrity of all our work, and it prevents, stops us probably from achieving our planned objectives. So our overall approach aims to do 4 things. We're trying to prevent it from happening in the first place. We want to listen to those who are affected. We want to respond sensitively but robustly, and we want to learn from every case. Next slide, please. So our work, the UK government's work on SEAH is based around what we call 4 strategic shifts. These date back to the October 2018 London Safeguarding Summit. Some of you may have heard of that, some of you won't have, but it doesn't matter. But these 4 shifts are say, underpin all of our work. So the first one is around providing better support to survivors and victims, trying to enhance accountability and transparency, strengthen reporting and tackling impunity. The second one is around incentivising cultural change through strong leadership, organisational accountability and better human resource processes. The third one is around we set out to agree minimum standards and ensure that we and our partners meet or exceed them. And finally, strengthening organisational capacity and capability across the whole aid sector to meet those minimum standards. So I think this course and this work, the MOOCs, are particularly relevant to 2 and 4 in terms of cultural change, capacity, capability, but also very relevant to the other ones, other 2 strategic shifts as well. Next slide, please. So just our key messages for partners, anyone we work with in the international development sector and also on diplomacy. We're really committed to tackling sexual exploitation, abuse and harassment over the long term. We have a UK government strategy that was published just over a year ago. We expect all of our partners to take this really seriously, and this has got to be part of how we work together. It's got to be a process of continuous learning and cultural change that's needed. We expect all our partners who we fund to do all they reasonably can to prevent sexual exploitation, abuse and sexual harassment from occurring, but to act quickly and sensitively upon reports and suspicions that it has occurred. We know we talk about sometimes a zero tolerance approach. We don't expect that to be zero cases, but we expect everyone to do all they reasonably can to prevent and respond appropriately. So we won't penalise partners for reporting, but as I say, we want assurance that people are taking a survivor-centred approach and are handling cases appropriately. So before we decide to fund an organisation, we will conduct a due diligence assessment, including an in-depth look at that organisation's capacity and capability on safeguarding. And the MOOCs have been designed with that in mind. Next slide. So just finally, just to give you a bit of a flavour, this is one element, this course is one element of our external capability work and a really key element of it. Other bits, we have a safeguarding resource and support hub, which focuses on grassroots civil society organisations and also aims to promote learning and networking opportunities at a global and also a national level. We provide funding to the Core Humanitarian Standards Alliance. There's a PSEAH handbook and also investigator training when it comes to preventing sexual exploitation, abuse and harassment. We fund HCI, which is the Humanitarian Quality Assurance Initiative. They provide independent verification of adherence to those, to that CHS standard. And then another example is the online organisational culture tool that we have funded Bonds, the UK NGO platform, to put together, and that's links to various other bits of material that Bond have that we funded Bond to produce. There are other things as well, but in the interest of time, I'll stop there. Very happy for these slides to be shared so people can have access to the various links. Thanks very much, Jen.
Lovely. Thanks, Peter, and thanks for setting that context around the Foreign Commonwealth and Development Office and sort of your perspectives there. And from an OU perspective, an Open University perspective, it's really great to be involved in this work, with you, and to be one element of the external capability work. Safeguarding is really so important, and really important that it's embedded in organisations across the board. So that's great. Rachel, do you want to just put the next slide on? And I'm just going to talk a little bit from the Open University perspective in terms of why we're involved to some extent, and just to sort of highlight that the Open University, yes, it's one of the UK's largest university, but more importantly, the OU brings with it experience of evidence-based pedagogy in online distance learning, and being able to ensure that the materials of these courses are presented in the right sort of way, using we're using FutureLearn, but it's the pedagogy that underpins that is very much using an approach that is of a social learning nature, whereby students, it's flexible, it enables students to learn when it's suitable for them, and so we bring to it that pedagogy. And plus also, if you just want to move on to the next slide. Actually, before we move on to that slide, sorry, I just wanted to say as well that the OU, it also has a long-standing experience and input into postgraduate courses in global development. We have engaged, directly in international development work through a whole range of partnerships. So we're well versed in sort of working in that international development sector. And when the projects first came into being, it was very clear that there was an unutilized potential for the use of online distance learning within the international development sector. And, we were interested in developing a range of short courses with a focus on supporting the development of practitioners to develop the skills and practice that they need in their jobs in a changing landscape. And so we had some successful conversations with DFID initially, and then with the Foreign Commonwealth Development Office around safeguarding in the international development sector, particularly in the international aid sector. And there was definitely a perceived gap in the accessible training to support organisations to improve safeguarding practice. And it's really important that safeguarding practice is improved, but the culture is actually embedded. So there's a safeguarding culture within the organisations. So as I said earlier, it's great to be working with FCDO and being part of that work to ensure that, safeguarding moves forward. It's got the profile it should have, and it is embedded. And as I say, the OU brings that experience of online distance learning and its pedagogy there. And so using our pedagogy of online distance learning, we then set out to develop 3 massive online courses. And some of you will have already done MOOC1. MOOC1 was very much about an introduction to safeguarding in the international aid sector, to sort of get people to understand the concepts, think about what it means, really thinking about what safeguarding means in practice. And then MOOC2 builds on that. MOOC2 is more around the sort of the actual practice of safeguarding. It's about implementing it. It's about sort of putting those skills into practice, really. So building on MOOC1, but I think I saw a question there around, should you have done MOOC1 to do MOOC2? Not necessarily. MOOC1 gives the foundations, but safeguarding awareness will help if you to do MOOC2. So MOOC2 is building on that. It's about embedding it, and I'll be handing over to Anita shortly, who will be able to talk about that. We will have a facilitator's handbook that will go with MOOCs 1 and 2, and the facilitator's handbook will enable participants of MOOCs 1 and 2 to be able to then take forward their learning and use it in practice, particularly around the training of others and embedding the safeguarding culture within the organisation. So the handbook, a really useful tool, and as I say, it sort of helps to implement what the learning that has already taken place. And MOOC2 will be launched at the end of this month. There will be a second presentation of MOOC2 in the new year. And then leadership in safeguarding will be launched in the spring, in April. And leadership in safeguarding is then building on the 2 MOOCs, but perhaps aimed slightly differently. As it says on the tin, it is around those safeguarding leadership skills that are needed to ensure that from the top of the organisation, as well as frontline practitioners, that there is a culture of safeguarding. It's about ensuring that everybody is able to lead on the implementation of safeguarding, and it's thinking about those skills that are needed from a leadership, from a senior management perspective, from a range of leaders within the organisation, to ensure that that safeguarding culture filters down, while also thinking that also helping to ensure that leadership skills are transformational and that frontline practitioners are also able to embed that safeguarding within the organisation. Do you want to bring the next slide up, Rachel? And this slide highlights some of the key issues or factors that have come up in terms of how well the course has been received from MOOC1. We've had 2 presentations of MOOC1 now, and it was accessed by a range of organisations from across the global south. We had 2,179 learners enrolled, which is great. 23 completion rate, which actually is higher than the global average for the completion rate of MOOCs. And over 90% of learners definitely increased their knowledge and safeguarding confidence, particularly in identifying, reporting and preventing safeguarding concerns. So they, are able to respond more quickly, which is great. So it's showing that actually those skills and that knowledge is being developed. And as it says in the bottom right-hand corner, 72.3% of the learners have safeguarding responsibilities within their organisation, and therefore it's really helped them in terms of thinking about their role, because these MOOCs 1 and 2 are for those participants who have a remit for safeguarding within their role within their organisation. And also 93.8% of the learners said MOOC1 had met their personal objectives. So we are obviously, aiming to have the same success for MOOC2. And, as I said earlier, that will be building on that knowledge and helping to further develop that confidence of participants, particularly in moving forward and embedding safeguarding culture and practice. Do you want to bring the next slide up, please, Rachel? And so these are just some of the feedback, the qualitative feedback that we've had from MOOC1, from the learner reviews. And as you can see there, many positive comments both about personal learning, but also around the materials, because the MOOC does have a range of visios, quizzes, activities, that it's about enabling the participant to engage with the learning and actually do it, in small bite-sized chunks, which we'll come to shortly. But it's, a social learning process, which enables practitioners to think about what they're doing, engage in discussions around that. And, as we've had from the feedback, it's clearly working for MOOC1, so that's great. Next slide, please, Rachel. So as I just mentioned a moment ago, in this sort of the pedagogy that we use, which is sort of basically how we deliver the content, we're using a social learning pedagogy, and that pedagogy, it's very much suited to the kind of audience and reach that we want for these MOOCs, because we want to reach, a big reach. We want it to, sort of people from a range of organizations, across the world to actually access, particularly sort of in the global south. And so it's very sort of conversational in its approach. It uses practical examples and many assets that can make the learning real for the participants. So as it says in the first box on the left-hand side of this slide, the learning's broken down into bite-sized chunks, so it's easy to manage. It's small bits of learning at once. It's over 6 weeks, but it's 4 hours of learning per week. And in the weeks are broken down into personally meaningful periods of study. It's very clear what the students will learn. It's set out at the beginning of each week, so the expectations are there, the learning outcomes, and the activities themselves are then elements of the pedagogy, so that each activity has a defined goal, learning methods and an outcome. and it's about you putting that learning into practice. So therefore an activity, you know, it could be a case study, it could be an article, it could be a video, it could be a quiz or a discussion forum, but essentially, you know, the participants may be asked to watch a video. They will then be asked to pose questions, share reflections, and think about how they then may apply that learning into their own practice on a daily basis. And the different steps, in some ways, as described on the slide there, are the Lego bricks that form the activity. So they sort of build the activity and take it. So, and as you can see on the right hand slide, the questions that might be posed might be, you know, around what would you do. There'll be then a knowledge check, and there'll be some discussion. So as I mentioned earlier, it's very sort of conversational in its approach in terms of that social learning. And so overall, you know, it's easy. Students or participants are signposted and guided through each activity really carefully, and each step of the learning activity is very clearly signposted. So I'm going to, if you move on to the next slide, because I'm going to be handing over to Anita shortly, who will be talking about the content of MOOC2. And this is the authoring team, so please meet the authoring team. Anita will be introducing herself shortly. I'm Jan Webb, and as I mentioned earlier, I work at well, as I mentioned earlier, I am the academic lead for MOOC2 and will be for MOOC3 as well. I work at the OU. I'm Associate Head of School for Nursing and Health Professions. But before coming to the OU, I have for many, many years, too many years to think about really, taught safeguarding and child protection and safeguarding across the life course in various different contexts to a range of sectors at various levels, from just one day study days to a master's program in safeguarding, which I developed and ran and helped to deliver. So I have a range of safeguarding experience, but I also bring the OU perspective and expertise around delivering short courses and MOOCs, and that's me. And so Susan, I'm going to ask you to just introduce yourself, and then Andy, and then we'll hand over to Anita.
Thanks, Jan. So I'm Susan Fawcett. Like everyone here, I'm an author on MOOC2. I work as a tutor at the Open University, but I also am a development management consultant, particularly working on higher education projects in the developing world. I also have done quite a lot of training with various development organisations, as well as writing other Future Learn courses. And Future Learn, of course, is the platform upon which both MOOCs are held. So I hope you enjoy studying MOOC2. Thanks.
And Andy, do you want to just say a little bit about yourself?
Hi, I'm Andy Ripson. I'm a lecturer at the Open University, specialising in work with children and families primarily. And like Jan, my background really is in teaching and learning around safeguarding issues with social workers. And I hope you enjoy the MOOC.
Brilliant, thanks Andy. And I'm now going to hand over to Anita, who is our subject expert, and some of you may well know Anita from different contexts. And Anita, you know, has worked, you know, has extensive experience at working in this sector around safeguarding, and you know, very much has led this project and pulls the content of the MOOCs together for us. And so I'm going to hand over now to Anita, our subject expert. So thanks, Anita.
Thank you, Jan. Thanks. Rachel, if you could put the next slide. Okay, good afternoon, everyone, or good morning or good evening, depending where you are in the world. So karibu and welcome to the overview of MOOC2, which is what we're launching today, implementing safeguarding in the international aid sector. Next slide, please. So who is this course for? It is anyone working in the international development and humanitarian sector. So collectively, we use the word aid sector here. It has been specifically designed for those with safeguarding responsibility. So be it safeguarding officers, safeguarding leads, safeguarding focal persons. And if you're working in programs, comms, marketing, operations, HR, this course is for you. It has also been designed specifically for those in low resource context. So if you are double hatting, if you have several roles at one time and including the responsibilities for safeguarding, this course has also been developed for you. Next slide, please. So the learning objectives of this 24 self-learning course has been divided into 4 key learning objectives: mitigating and preventing against safeguarding risks associated with the work that you do, design or adapting tools and implementing activities that minimize harm. And that really is a key part of safeguarding prevention to those who have direct or indirect contact with your work or your organization. Then we talk about the responding to challenges relating to safeguarding concerns, and as Peter says, using a survivor-centered approach. And then fourthly, supporting accountability. And this is hugely important, that there are consequences for all forms of misconduct. So supporting accountability for those who benefit from your work and in the international aid sector more generally. Next slide, please. So the course content, for those of you who registered for MOOC1, and I hope you enjoyed MOOC1, which was the introduction to safeguarding, MOOC2 is very much like MOOC1 in the sense that we use the safeguarding cycle. So in week 1, we have our introductory topics. We go through again and revise international safeguarding standards. Excuse me. In week 2, we look at identifying risks as well as identifying various forms of harm. I saw a question from Liam. Hi, Liam. We don't only focus on sexual exploitation and abuse and sexual harassment, though that is a specific focus. We look at identifying all forms of harm. Week 3, we talked about prevention. So where the risks are, we talk about mitigating measures put in place to prevent. Obviously, the key areas of developing safe recruitment practices, a robust code of conduct, how we can ensure that we look at safeguarding when we are talking about communications, advocacy, marketing, all sorts of different areas around prevention. Week 4, we talk about report and responding, and in there we use a lot of case studies. What do we do if? And of course, we talk about managing disclosure and around having, again, clear referral pathways. Week 5, we talk about improving accountability, so developing robust community-based complaints mechanisms, accountability mechanisms internally, as well as working with external agencies. And then in week 6, we talk about monitoring and learning. So talk about how learning would look like. What does that how do we support a learning culture within the organization with a view of developing organizational safeguarding culture? Next slide, please. So I've already covered a lot of this, but just to highlight that it does build from course 1. You don't necessarily have to have done course 1, but certainly the course 2 is about the implementation of those key principles that you may have studied in course 1. We look around areas of vulnerability, intersectionality, and safeguarding risk in both development and humanitarian programs and operations. We look specifically on prevention mechanisms, say, for example, working with children and people with disabilities. As I mentioned, reporting, responding, we talked about community-based complaints mechanisms, protection for whistleblowers, confidentiality, and survivor-centered referrals. Talked about accountability previously, as well as the implementation and learning from safeguarding practices in order to develop organizational safeguarding culture. Next slide, please. So we have used the principles that we talked about in course 1, we revised them in course 2, but we also then set them in various programmatic contexts. So there's a real emphasis in course 2 on safe programming in both development and humanitarian settings. If you're an academic organization or working with academia, how should we implement safeguarding standards when undertaking research and data collection? As I mentioned, working with the most vulnerable in society, for example, children and people with disabilities, as well as on working with digital platforms. So we, particularly around the area of the fact that we're using more and more instant messaging devices, marketing and comms. There's a section on working with men and boys and LGBTQI groups. We talk about protection of whistleblowers and organizational duty of care to staff and associated personnel. You know, we're working externally with our beneficiaries, but also what then is our responsibility to staff and associated personnel, accountability to affected population, and as I said, organizational culture through learning. Next slide, please. So how will you learn? I mean, Jen went through this very extensively. I mean, it is a mixture of theory and practice. So you will have a little bit of theory. There will be resources, additional resources, again, very similar to course 1, where we added web links if you want to further research the subject. And then the practical side, you know, we've got our case studies, we've got tools and checklists and templates that you could use when you're thinking about how you want to use it within your own context. There's also, as usual, pre-recorded interviews with practitioners from the field, and many of them may be on the call today. And then what's really, really good about the Future Learn platform is that whole peer learning through sharing of good practice on the discussion forum. There's the FAQs with animated learners. So you'll remember Hassan and Shireen, if you did course 1, they appear again in course 2, and that's proved to be quite popular. And then the knowledge check quizzes at the end of each week. You know, did I really learn this? Oh, hang on a minute, I didn't know that point. And then the quiz will then signpost you back to the step on during that week to say, right, you know, you'll find the answer here. And then of course, you know, really important as part of your learning as well is personal reflection time. So really important where you've done the case studies or the tools, and then how then would you apply it to your own context and the work that you're doing. Next slide, please. We're so pleased that we have a really good trained educators who are going to be on the course, who are going to be helping learners during the course. We've got Vicky Ferguson, Simon Vorley, and Haifa Nguyen, and they're all safeguarding specialists. They're all field practitioners, and they're all waiting to support you if you're the learner. You know, during this course, so Vicky and Simon have done course 1, so they're familiar with the content there. And here for course 2, the 3 of them will be supporting you during the course. Particularly, you'll see them interacting with you on the discussion forum. Next slide, please. So it's just really important that remember we keep ourselves safe when we're online. So the minimum age for this course is 18 plus. There is a Future Learn Code of Conduct that learners would have to read and agree to. There are online Future Learn moderators. So the educators who you just saw on the previous slide, they will highlight to the moderators if content that learners may have said are inappropriate for whatever shape or form, that content is removed and the learner is informed why it has been removed. There are trigger warnings prior to watching videos, so really important that you know, we warn people, okay, this may be quite disturbing. There are no major disturbing videos on, so you don't need to worry, but we've ensured that people understand it's also important to be, to self-care. There are reporting mechanisms. So because this is on Future Learn, there is a Future Learn safeguarding lead, and there is an opportunity to email the safeguarding lead if you see anything inappropriate that's being said or being done on the online platform. And then, yeah, as I mentioned, the trained facilitators who are safeguarding specialists who will be supporting the learners throughout the 6 weeks that the course will be online. Next slide, please. So we really, really want to acknowledge the multitude of organizations and safeguarding specialists who have supported this course in every which way. Some of them are on the call today. So our usual members who are born, CHS Alliance. We want to give a shout out to the Liverpool School of Tropical Medicine, Manuel Daniels, Medicine Sans Frontier International, Plan International Kenya, the Safeguarding Resource and Support Hub, Safeguarding Leads Network, Sense International, WaterAid, and the World Hospice Palliative Care Alliance. Some of you would have provided video content, some of you would have provided case studies, some of you may have been our critical reviewers. So thank you very much. Next slide, please. So nothing further for me. I'm happy to answer any questions at the end. I'm going to hand over to Hannah now. Thank you.
Thanks, Anita. Hi, everyone. So I'm the Senior Project Manager at the Open University for this project. I'm just going to take just a couple of minutes to talk to you very briefly about the platform and how you can do the registration process and enroll on the course. Next slide, please, Rachel. So as Jan indicated earlier, this is the second of 3 MOOCs. There'll be a number of presentations of each of those MOOCs, and all of the presentations will be on the FutureLearn platform. We mentioned earlier about MOOC1. We've already presented that twice, and I saw a question earlier about whether there's another presentation. There is indeed. That will start on January the 24th. If you haven't completed MOOC1 already, please do sign up for that. And if you have and you loved it, then please spread the word. Share it with your colleagues, with any partners you're working with, particularly those with safeguarding responsibilities. So today, Anita's given us a lot more detail around the content of MOOC2. And as we've said, this starts on Monday, but the course is already open for enrolment now. So the link that you can see at the top of this slide, and I've shared it on the chat just a moment ago, that will take you to the FutureLearn site and enable you to enroll on the course. And it's also the link that you want to share if you want to share it onward to any of your colleagues or partners. Next slide, please. So when you follow that link, you will get to the course landing page. And on that page, you're really just going to find lots and lots of information aligning with what Anita and Jan have shared today. So there's a very detailed course description, the learning outcomes are there. You can see an example there of where the syllabus is detailed out for each of the 6 weeks. And then there's within each week, there's a drop down to see what's covered within those individual weeks. There's also a section on the authoring and facilitation team as well. And then, as I said, yeah, this is really probably the best link for you to share if you want to, if you need to reference any particular detail around what's included in the course. So I'd really encourage you all to sign up before Monday. That way you will be ready to get started as soon as the content goes live on Monday morning. And as Anita has talked about, that will then enable you to take full advantage of the social learning aspect of the course and get involved in the discussion. So next slide, please. So on the landing page, there's a pink button in several places, and that pink button is what you click in order to register. For those of you that have already studied MOOC1, you'll be able to log back in using the same details. For those of you that haven't, you can enroll either using your Facebook or Google account, or indeed you can set yourself up an account with FutureLearn directly, just using an email address and a password. So as I said, the course is open for enrolment right now, and you can actually start the learning as from Monday. It is completely free to study. For those of you that would like to have a certificate once you've completed the course, you can do that for a small fee. The costs of that go towards supporting future iterations of the course on FutureLearn. So once you've enrolled, Jan's went into some detail around this, but there is a huge amount of flexibility as to how you study the content. So hopefully you'll be able to sort of really comfortably fit it around your existing commitments. It is split into these 6 weeks, these chunks of learning, but you can absolutely learn at your own pace. You can do it all in one go. You can do it very gradually. You can jump between the weeks. You can jump backwards and forwards. If you particularly enjoyed an activity, then you can go back to that and repeat it. You can rewatch all the videos. You can absolutely do what works best for you in your study process. It's incredibly easy to navigate between the weeks and the activities. You can see on there where the weeks are listed with the numbers underneath. You literally just click on a week and it takes you there. So it's very, very easy. And there will be further flexibility in this presentation that we're about to launch on Monday. That's because we're delivering over Christmas. So because of that, and we want to enable you as learners and also our wonderful facilitation team a little bit of a break over the holiday period. We are extending both the facilitation period right to the 23rd of January, and the course itself will be open until the 30th of January. So you'll have 9 weeks in total to complete the 6 weeks worth of content. So I think that's it from me. I will hand back to Jan now, as I'm sure there's probably some questions to hand over to the team.